Winter inside a medieval castle was not a storybook scene of roaring fires and stone halls glowing with warmth. The paradox is brutal and simple. Castles were built to stop armies, not cold, and the very features that made them nearly impossible to conquer also made them dangerously hard to survive. Thick stone walls absorbed winter like ice, floors sucked heat from bare feet, and towering ceilings trapped cold air above the people who slept below. Imagine stepping inside a fortress meant to protect life, only to discover it could quietly kill you through exposure. For many who lived within those walls, winter was not a season. It was an endurance trial, measured night by night. People didn't ask whether the cold would be uncomfortable. They asked whether it would be survivable. The mystery isn't why castles were cold, that's obvious. The mystery is how anyone lived through months of freezing darkness at all. No central heating, no insulation in the modern sense, no glass windows to seal warmth inside. And yet people survived, not through comfort, but through discipline, adaptation, and hard-earned knowledge passed down through suffering. This was never a fairy tale. It was a lesson in how humans bend to hostile environments without breaking, even when shelter itself turns into an enemy. To understand why winter survival in castles was so unforgiving, you have to remember who these buildings were actually for. Castles were military machines first, homes second, if at all. They were designed to intimidate, defend, and outlast sieges, not nurture comfort. Stone was chosen because it resisted fire and weapons, not because it retained warmth. Narrow windows kept arrows out, but let cold creep in. Drafty stairwells spiraled upward like chimneys, pulling heat away from living spaces. Life inside followed rigid hierarchies, and winter amplified every inequality. Nobles had access to private chambers closer to kitchens and hearths, while servants and soldiers slept in shared halls or towers where frost formed on the walls. Fuel was precious. Wood had to be hauled, stored, guarded, and rationed. Fires were allowed in limited areas because uncontrolled flames could destroy the very structure meant to protect everyone. Add to this the Little Ice Age, a period of harsher winters that gripped medieval Europe for centuries, and survival became even more uncertain. Castles weren't abandoned in winter because people chose hardship. They stayed because power, duty, and protection demanded it. Enduring the cold became part of loyalty, service, and identity. Here's the clever part most people never learn. Castle inhabitants didn't survive winter by trying to heat massive stone spaces. That was impossible. Instead, they learned to manage heat in layers, controlling how warmth moved, where it was lost, and who benefited from it. Sleeping platforms were raised off stone floors to stop conductive heat loss. Straw mattresses trapped air, acting as insulation long before the word existed. Wool wasn't fashion, it was technology layered in blankets, cloaks and bedding that slowed heat escape. People slept close together, sometimes entire households in one room, because shared body heat was more reliable than fire. Tapestries weren't decoration, they were thermal shields hung along exterior walls to reduce radiant cold. Kitchens, bakeries and smithing areas were positioned so excess heat drifted into living quarters. Even castle layouts mattered. Corridors were designed to slow airflow, doors were kept heavy, and movement at night was minimized to prevent heat loss. None of this came from theory or science books. It came from watching what failed and burying those who didn't adapt. Survival knowledge was learned the hardest way possible. What makes this story unsettling is how relevant it still is. Medieval castle survival wasn't about comfort, it was about efficiency, something modern life often forgets. Today, we rely on systems that brute force warmth through energy consumption, assuming heat is endless and instant. Medieval people couldn't afford that illusion. They designed living spaces around human bodies, not machines. They understood microclimates, concentrating warmth where people slept rather than wasting it on empty air. That same logic applies today in passive housing, insulation design, and energy-efficient architecture. The idea of layering, zoning heat, blocking drafts, and using shared warmth is now returning under new names. In emergencies, power outages, or extreme climates, these old principles suddenly matter again. The castle winter teaches a harsh lesson. Survival favours adaptability, not excess. Comfort is fragile. Systems fail. Knowledge endures. The people who lived through those winters weren't stronger because they were tougher. They were smarter because they had to be. Surviving winter inside a medieval castle was never a fairy tale, because fairy tales promise safety without effort. Castles offered protection, but survival demanded constant awareness, discipline, and cooperation. The cold was never defeated, only managed, respected, and endured. Every raised bed, shared blanket, and carefully placed fire was a reminder that life inside stone walls was a negotiation with nature, not a victory over it. When central heating arrived, this knowledge faded, written off as primitive because it was no longer necessary. But forgotten doesn't mean useless. In a world facing energy limits, climate extremes, and fragile systems, these lessons matter again. The castle wasn't warm. The people learned how to stay alive inside it. If this story changed how you see history, survival, or even your own home, take a moment to share it, subscribe, and keep exploring the past, because buried inside old stone walls are answers we may need again.